there was a recession due anyway. It's going to be accelerated by the uncertainty that Trump has injected into the system. If Simon Harris had guts and testicles, he would have chosen housing. When are we going to fire some people in the public service?
You don't see Sinn Féin as change. I don't believe they see that as change.
I think something that is fresh and that is real Republican. Not firing shots over graves, but empowering the people.
So hi everyone, you're very welcome to my next podcast. Elaine Mullally is my name, and I'm delighted today to be joined with Cormac Lucey. Thank you very much, Cormac, for coming on to have a chat with me.
Thanks, Elaine.
So Cormac, just a little background to yourself. You're from Blackrock in Dublin. You're a chartered accountant and an economics columnist with the Sunday Times, the Irish edition, and you lecture in finance in the Irish Management Institute. So you're very, very welcome, and on this beautiful day. You might just, I suppose what's happened the last few weeks has been extremely something we've never witnessed before in Ireland, but I have never in my lifetime. So from an economist perspective, how would you sum up what's happened in the last 2 weeks in Ireland with the tariffs on, tariffs off? Where are we? Where are we now, would you say?
I'd go a step further back. So I worked for several years as a political advisor to Michael McDowell when he was Justice Minister. And I think in Donald Trump, we have an exceptional American president who is epoch changing. So, you had people like George Bush Sr., George Bush Jr., Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and they were all continuity candidates of one sort or another. But Donald Trump he's a completely different sort of president to those guys. And he tried in his first administration to push through radical changes, but essentially he was talked out of them by the Republican establishment advisors that he had gathered around him. And then when Joe Biden unseated him in 2020, two things happened. Firstly, Donald Trump was subjected to extraordinary degrees of lawfare, the use of the law to hunt down a politician. And secondly, he made contact with people in organizations like the Heritage Foundation, and they came up with Project 2025, which was essentially an agenda for Trump 2.0. So he's come, he won the most extraordinary victory last November. If you'd said 3 years ago Donald Trump is going to be re-elected, people would have looked at you and wondered, were you on something? When you consider the volume of political challenges that he faced and legal challenges, and he overcame them, he got re-elected. He got re-elected with a much stronger vote than people had expected.
Yeah.
And he got re-elected with a coherent political agenda. Whether you agree with it or not, it's quite clear that he's hit the ground running this time in a way that's in complete contrast to what happened 8 years ago when he got in first in 2016, 2017. So what he's been doing on tariffs in the last fortnight is just part of this more thought out political plan for him. I think it's a crazy plan myself. I would have voted for Trump. I think there are very few people who speak publicly in Ireland who would admit to voting for Trump. Now, I would have had very clear reservations about him, but I think Kamala Harris would have been substantially worse.
Yeah.
And the Democrats would have been substantially worse. So I would have reluctantly voted but clearly voted for Trump. This aspect, the tariff aspect of his agenda, is one that I think is devoid of economic reason. And I think this brings us to another aspect where Trump, in my opinion, is exceptional. He's like a 5-year-old. He's like a very smart, cute as a fox, well able to look after himself in a schoolyard scrap sort of person, well able to manipulate the gang so that he comes out as leader of the gang, but he's completely unintellectual, doesn't there were lots of stories about the late Queen Elizabeth, who died last year, and the extent of reading that she did as British head of state to keep herself up to date with what ministers in her government were doing, so that she would be in a position then to have sensible conversations with prime ministers, with ministers. It's clear Trump doesn't do any of that, even though he does not have executive responsibility. He does have executive responsibility for decision making in a way that the late Queen didn't. And this tariff war we're now in, he spent a fortune in 1987 to put one-page ads into the New York Times and other top American newspapers arguing for tariffs. So this isn't some whim that he has adopted 3 months ago or 6 months ago. He has believed this for 40 years, that tariffs are the way to go and that trade imbalances shouldn't exist. And the notion that trade imbalances shouldn't exist is just nuts. If Ireland sells whiskey to England, and if England sells beer to France, and if France sells wine to Ireland, each country, we've got a trade imbalance with England. We're just exporting to them. We've got a trade imbalance with France. We're just importing from them. That doesn't mean that there's something wrong with those arrangements. Trade arrangements, by their very nature, are entirely voluntary. So what's the problem? The problem in America is they have continuous deficits, meaning that they're importing a lot more than they're exporting. And that's really down, in my opinion, to two things. One is they're a nation that doesn't save very much. So they're spending a much higher proportion of their incomes than, say, the Germans or the Swiss or the Irish. Mm-hmm. So they're spending more, and that means they're importing more relative to other nations. And the second one is, and this hasn't really featured in the debate at all, the dollar is the world's reserve currency. So if the Indian central bank is doing some dealings with the Pakistani central bank, the common currency they can do those trades in is the dollar. It is the liquid currency that lubricates global finance. That gives the Americans a terrific advantage. They can turn on a printing press, print off dollars, sell them to the central bank of Pakistan for the Pakistani currency that they can then use and buy stuff with. They can sell freshly printed dollars to the central bank of India, buy stuff with what the Indians give them, knowing that unless we reach a doomsday situation, the dollars that they're selling are essentially not going to be used. They're going to be kept under a metaphorical mattress for use by other central banks on a rainy day. So I think Trump's understanding of trade deficits is fundamentally misconceived. It's entirely understandable why America is running a trade deficit. When the Brits and sterling was a reserve currency, the Brits ran successive and very large goods deficits for the same reason that the Americans are running them now. So I think his understanding of the problem is wrong. And I think his remedy now to unleash tariffs across the globe, I think that's a mistake at a time when I think the American economy is already in a pretty fragile pre-recession state. And this may make the difference between being pre-recession and being in a recession. And from a political standpoint, Trump is likely to get the blame if that emerges.
So what like if it's not a mistake, or what is it then? What's the goal behind? Like you've said, this is a plan of his for years. So why is he doing it? Why it can't be just that he thinks it's
I think he's been acting in the last 2 months as if he got re-elected with 80% of the vote. And all of his acolytes around him, they're all feeding this. Nobody's saying, hang on a minute, you're
the
off.
emperor's no clothes.
Correct. You won't be invited back if you tell him that. We could see this in Like I read long before he became a vice presidential possibility, I read J.D. Vance's book Hillbilly Elegy, which is a very good book, well worth reading. He's clearly highly intelligent, highly capable individual. But to see him just in complete suck up mode, telling Denmark essentially, oh, you have to hand over Greenland to America because this is what President Trump wants. It's just pathetic.
Wow.
And you've a whole lot of people around Trump who are giving him varying versions of that message. What Donald says happens. What the president wants happens, whether it's right or whether it's wrong.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen in the last fortnight are tensions behind the scenes, where you have the Treasury Secretary lukewarm on these tariffs at best, warning of their financial market implications, versus, say, the Commerce Secretary, Howard Lutnick, who's a very strong supporter of the tariffs. And we had very sharp falls in the US stock market last week. We've had major disturbances in the US bond market. And I think it was those bond market disturbances that pushed the Treasury Secretary to persuade Trump to postpone the worst of the tariffs for 90 days. Now, the thing is, Irish exporters are still going to face an extra 10% tariff, notwithstanding these concessions. So it's a bit like, if you were kidnapped, Elaine, and the kidnappers rang up your family and said, we're going to cut off Elaine's left hand. And then, as a massive concession, they decided, well, actually, we're just going to cut off the little finger on her left hand. Aren't we being very generous? We hope you'll be suitably grateful for this concession. We are still going to suffer damage. The scale of the damage will be less.
What do you reckon the scale of the damage will be?
I think it's very hard to know. In Ireland, the scale of the damage will be quite modest, assuming nothing significant happens in pharma. So over half of our goods exports to the United States are of pharmaceuticals. So when Trump announced these tariffs and carved out pharmaceuticals from the tariffs, there'd have been massive sighs of relief in government buildings over that. Now, the question is that carve out permanent, or are Trump's gurus just working out some even more exquisite form of torture for the Irish pharma sector that he's going to unveil in 2 or 3 weeks? So if it was just 10% tariffs applied to non-pharma exports, we could live with that. The impact on our national income would be less than a 2% hit. So that would be, a speed bump, not a roadblock. And we could get on from there, and everybody could declare victory, and we get on with our lives. My fear is twofold. Firstly, that he's going to come up with something on pharma that's going to make things considerably worse for Ireland. And secondly, this thing with China, that's going to be an economic equivalent of the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we've got a massive game of chicken between two global world powers. And I would suspect, if I had to bet on who has the strongest staying power in that game of chicken, I'd be backing the Chinese rather than the Americans.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
All right. That's interesting.
And if you're running a dictatorship, and if you've got the secret police able to cart off your political opponents to prison, that gives you considerable insulation from domestic unhappiness.
Absolutely. So yeah, look, so we can kind of explore everything from a tariff perspective, from a layperson's terms, in layperson's terms. Who pays the tariff? Like who's going to suffer the consequences, and ultimately, who actually is the person who pays the piper for all of this? And I know it's only 10%, but like you say, it's not as big a deal, but it's still 10%. It's going to have an impact. And a second question, which kind of leads from this, there's a lot of people, including myself, who kind of, there was an undercurrent brewing that Ireland was going to go into a recession, or possibly even a world recession, is coming our way anyway. So,
Well, I think they're two separate questions. If we just look at
yeah,
them separately, if we just look at the
yeah,
tariff, so if we just take the example of Irish distillers, and they're exporting Irish whiskey to the United States, and now their whiskey faces an additional 10% tariff on top of whatever taxes and import duties they had previously been facing. What that essentially means is when their goods ship to the United States, they will have to pay import tariffs equivalent to 10% of the value of the goods they're shipping.
okay,
And tariffs would be different, say, from value added tax. If let's say the government imposed an extra 10% VAT rate on Dunn stores, Dunn stores would have to charge their customers, that's you and me, an extra 10% on what they're selling. But Dunn stores could claim
yeah,
VAT on what they're purchasing. So if Dunn stores' purchase costs are 90% of their revenues, they're really only paying an extra 1%.
mm,
10% of the difference between 100% and 90%. Whereas with a tariff, there's no offset, there's no credit. It's just a straight on the top. What are these goods worth? Bang, there's a 10% tariff. I'll have that from you, please. So who bears the tariff? In theory, it is the customers of Irish distillers in this case, in the United States. In practice, what's going to happen is Irish distillers is going to suffer a cost disadvantage relative to its American domestic producer competitors. So whoever's producing Jack Daniels, they're not facing any tariff. Now they're competing against Irish distillers, and suddenly Irish distillers has to charge 10% more. So Irish distillers may, for commercial reasons, say to themselves, well, we won't pass on the full 10%. We swallow at a corporate level some of this 10% increase ourselves, and we'll increase our prices by, say, 6%.
mm.
And we'll swallow 4% of that tax as a reduction in margin.
In the hope that the product will still be competitive when it gets to America and can compete against the American brands.
Yeah, and these high-end, luxury goods sellers, they would have very sophisticated pricing models where they would have a very good handle on the sensitivity of demand for their goods with the price of their goods. So they will be able to quickly ascertain what share of this 10% price increase should we pass on to our customers to optimize our resulting contribution margin and to optimize our resulting profits. And it won't be the full 100% of the tariff. So there'll be some share of the pain, that the pain will be shared between the customer, who'll have to pay more, and the producer, who will have to swallow, who will probably choose to swallow some of that tariff in the form of a reduced sales price margin. So that's one aspect of the tariff. Another aspect of the tariff is, so let's say Irish distillers' price sensitivity model tells them pass on 6% of the 10% tariff to the customers and swallow 4% yourselves. So they increase their prices by 6%. Now Jack Daniels faces a less competitive domestic market position. Let's say all of the other importers of spirits into the United States follow Irish distillers, and they all raise their prices by 6%. Suddenly, Jack Daniels, they can choose to raise their prices by 6%, and one would imagine that their market share will remain unchanged, but now they've got a massive increase to their bottom line at no cost.
Mm.
Or they might say, well, we'll raise our prices by 3%, and we'll get a bigger bottom line, but B, we'll eat up some of the market share of our foreign competitors. the academic evidence would indicate that tariffs subsidize domestic producers and may encourage inefficient production practices by them. It relieves them from full competition and allows them become lazy.
But is that the intention? Is to alleviate the foreign competition?
You
Is that
see, I think you have children. I've got a son. We've both been in crashes in live hostility situations, and you've got a 4-year-old or a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum. You don't suddenly start checking through, oh, what's the rationale for this tantrum? You just try to put a stop to it.
I'm trying to work out though tariffs in general. Like, is the purpose of tariffs, is it designed to protect the nation's own produce in
The
effect?
stated objectives of Trump tariffs are firstly to raise tax revenue for the American exchequer. The American exchequer is running a colossal deficit at the minute, even though the American economy is flying.
Mm.
So what sort of deficit will it be running if America tips into recession?
Yeah.
So one problem that Trump needs to face up to is the broken state of the American public finances. This would go part of the way towards that. A second thing he's trying to address, he says, is America's trade deficit, which is the fact that America is importing far more goods than it is exporting.
Mm-hmm.
I think he's mistaken in looking at things through that prism, but that's what he says he's doing. And the third thing then he says he's trying to do is to reshore jobs to America that American manufacturers have offshored over the last 30, 40 years.
That's probably the scariest from an Irish perspective.
Well, I think there's a scarier possibility, and that is, if we look forward 20 years, how many manufacturing jobs, if we look at the potential impact of AI, now I'm not talking about artificial insemination here. I know you come from a rural area. I'm talking artificial intelligence.
I'm
But
not
like
that rural.
if we look at the full potential of that, will there be routine production line jobs at all anywhere in 20 years' time?
No, probably not.
So this is another reason why I think Trump is potentially gravely mistaken. He's choosing a target, manufacturing jobs, that I think are going through a very severe secular decline anyway, because of the advances in technology that are coming from American companies. Like, it's American companies that have a lot of this AI know-how. And America is running a massive services balance of payment surplus. They're exporting far more services with things like Apple, Netflix, than they're importing. So Trump is like somebody who wants to have a shower every morning but never wants to get wet. He wants the benefits of trade, but if there's a negative aspect of it, he imagines that he can eliminate that without undoing the good aspects of trade that he does want. So I think his whole policy here is misconceived.
Yeah. And it's a little, like you say, it's tantrumish. It's like, I mean, he has openly said he wants to hurt China. So, like, that's a bit.
And he imposed tariffs on all of these countries 2 weeks ago. No tariffs on Russia, no tariffs on North Korea. So it's better. You're likely to come off more likely in a battle with Donald Trump if you're his enemy than if you're his friend.
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, do Ireland impose tariffs on American goods?
No, but we are part of the EU, and we apply common tariffs, duties, value-added tax regime to imports together with all of our EU partner nations. And by the way, we have very low tariffs. Trump is going to very significantly raise the average American tariff rate, even on his scaled down version of tariffs that he
Mm.
announced 10 days ago. The EU Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, she has offered full reciprocity, 0%, 0%. And Trump has been evasive in responding to that offer. He's not looking at tariffs, even though what he listed on his big board were tariffs. What the data behind what he called tariffs were trade imbalances. He wants to eliminate trade imbalances. So, he does not want a situation where you're going to your hairdresser and you're paying your hairdresser and she's not buying anything off you. That's a trade imbalance.
Mm.
Your hairdresser is exploiting you. She's not buying anything off you. This is an intolerable situation. So you need to put tariffs on her.
It's like putting manners. Yeah, I know.
Bonkers.
It's crazy. Do you think that the American multinationals, do you think many will leave Ireland as a result of President Trump's policies?
No. I think there are a number of aspects we need to consider here. The legal basis on which he's brought in these tariffs are emergency powers that Congress voted to the presidency a number of years ago. And there's already a Midwestern American manufacturer that's gone to court saying there is no emergency right now. You're using emergency legislation as the legal basis to give you the power to impose these tariffs. Where's the emergency? That's one threat. A second threat is there was a vote in the Senate last week where a majority of senators voted against the tariffs imposed on Canada. So there is a majority in the Senate. It included 4 Republicans who crossed the aisle to vote against this, including a guy who's worth following on this, Senator Rand Paul. And in his public utterances on this, Rand Paul has pointed out that previous Republican presidents who pushed tariffs aggressively, President McKinley, who Trump is a big fan of, who was a president in the late 1800s, the tariffs lasted 4 years. He was voted out and the tariffs were thrown out once he disappeared. And then Herbert Hoover, who ushered in the Great Depression and ushered in 60 years where the Republicans were in a minority in Congress. So Rand Paul is arguing 2 things. He's arguing, number 1, these tariffs make no economic sense. 2, they represent political poison.
Mm.
And while Republicans may be bullied, cajoled in the short run into backing this, in the medium term, the consequences of these tariffs is likely to be negative politically and very damaging to Republicans' midterm chances. And broken and all as the Democrats are right now, the Democrats are roughly a 50% party in the United States. So they've got roughly 50 senators and 25 governors. So they have a talent pool, let's say, of 75 front-rank politicians. 2 or 3 of them are bound to surface as strong presidential candidates for 2028. And if they find a Bill Clinton Mark II, he or she will be able to do a lot of damage to Trump if, as I expect, there's going to be a recession anyway, but people will now blame that recession on Trump and the economic tantrums that he unleashed over tariffs.
That's exactly my belief, is that there's a recession coming, and it's a case of everything's going to be very easy blamed, because people always look for somebody to blame in a recession. It's never that our government weren't looking after our eggs in our basket, that there were. So, yeah.
Well, if you're an adolescent schoolboy, one of the first things you learn, nobody teaches you, but one of the first things you learn is if there's some mess in the school or in the classroom, make yourself scarce. When teacher finds out about it, don't be the one standing next to it.
Yeah.
Trump, by contrast, has made disruptive economic actions the hallmark of his presidency. And if a recession is called next month, it's going to be the Trump recession. It's going to be the Trump bear market. And that's going to be toxic for Republican congressional candidates in October, 12 months.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's so back to the point, say leaving President Trump out of the equation, what way do you see the whole economy going at the moment, or have you seen a trend emerging before all of this? Like you say, whoever's left holding the ball is the one who's going to get the blame. But like prior to that, where were we going?
Prior to Trump,
yeah,
in my opinion, there was a recession coming into the US sometime this year anyway. There's a technical measure called the yield curve that had signaled. US unemployment has lifted by about half a percent from its bottom. And in the past, when that has happened, when unemployment has dropped, and then, the unemployment rate, if you have a recession, that's typically followed by 4 to 8 years of recovery. And over those 4 to 8 years, the unemployment rate steadily falls. If the unemployment rate then hits a bottom and starts to climb, and climbs by more than 0.5% from its minimum, you typically get a recession pretty quickly. We are in that state right now. And we're in that state in January, February, before Trump announced his tariffs. So I think there was a recession due anyway, and it's going to be accelerated by the uncertainty that Trump has injected into the system. So if you're a business owner in America thinking of building a new factory, you're going to put those plans on ice, saying, let's wait for the situation to stabilize, and then we'll have a fresh look at it. So a whole load of projects are going to be put on ice. A whole load of employment plans may be scaled back. It's becoming harder for people to find jobs. And it would not surprise me if an American recession was called in the next 30 to 45 days.
What about Ireland?
Well, I think we're in a completely different situation here. And it's very hard there are multiple measures that you could apply to what's happening in Ireland. I think our figures are being distorted by very heavy immigration. So the total output of the Irish economy may be growing quite strongly, but a significant share of that increased output is attributable to new people who've arrived. It's not that the income or output per person already here is growing significantly. It's more that output is being increased because there are more people working, and those extra people working have come in from outside. So that, I think, is distorting the picture. I think the housing market, there is just colossal suppressed demand there. And in the past, the housing market was the canary down the coal mine that gave advance warning of a recession, because housing activity would slow down before the economy slowed down. But we have so much suppressed housing demand now that I don't really see a housing output slowdown for the next 10 or 15 years. Not one caused by falling demand. Like we've got massive levels of suppressed housing demand, and the big constraint in our housing market is planning permissions.
Yeah.
Sites that can be built efficiently on. If I get a site for one house, I can only build pretty inefficiently there. Whereas if I get a site where I can build 500 apartments, now we're sucking diesel. we can really build efficiently there.
Can I throw something in there as well? Because I think it's a real spanner in the works, and it's something that's not getting the same airtime that I would have thought, or I would imagine it should get. And that is, so we built our house 31 years ago, and we built the house we could afford. So we bought a site, we built a house, we did what we had to do. We complied with obviously planning regs. Now houses are built to A rating, and I don't disagree with an A rated house. However, a price tag of 333,000 for a first time buyer or a young couple starting out is completely unaffordable. And that's in my area in Leashire, that most of the houses are roughly coming in at those kind of prices. For a standard semi-D, this is not like your mansion. So I believe that there's the systems that are in place here at the moment in relation to building regs is pushing up the price of houses unnecessarily. So again, to give an example of my own case, over the years, we're 31 years here now, we've got the walls pumped to a higher standard. We've got better insulation in our attic. We've had, as I said, the walls done, 16 solar panels. We generate a lot of our own electricity. We've a battery that can. So we did that as we could afford to as we progressed throughout life. And I think people are being forced into this, this idealism of your house has to be aerated and it has to be this, it has to have
It's
that.
not idealism. It's ideology. Like
Ideology.
we have the most expensive electricity prices in Europe because of this. And there's little or no pushback from our established parties.
Yeah.
Whereas really, in my opinion, we should have a national vote on a suspension of the mandatory aspect of these green policies. Let people individually pursue them voluntarily if they make sense at an individual or group level. But the compulsion of the state should be taken off the field of play. And let's have a plebiscite on that. I was working with Michael McDougall when we had the citizenship referendum. And polite middle-class Dublin went apeshit. That the notion that we shouldn't be granting citizenship to everybody should be reversed. And I can remember an emergency meeting of Progressive Democrat insiders being summoned in Farmley. So Ireland held the EU presidency at some point in 2005, and all of the government cabinet meetings were held in Farmley, so that if ministers who were travelling to Europe on EU business because we held the presidency, they could get up to Dublin Airport much more quickly. So we were meeting up there in advance of the cabinet meeting, and Mary just pressed the panic button. And there were 20 of us. So it was agreed, you're to do this, you're to do that, you're to do this. Michael's in danger of this. This will be a disaster for Michael McDougall. And I remember I was given 3 things to do, and there were 3 of us in a car going back into Dublin after this, having a chat. And I just silently resolved, I'm not doing any of these feckin' 3 things. We're going to walk it. And we walked it, I think, 3-1 or 4-1. It was just a landslide. And if you had a vote saying we are going to free from government compulsion these environmental energy saving measures, I think that would be very I think that would find similar resonance with our voters.
Yeah, I think it would too. I think it would be a huge, even though a lot of people might not actually realise that this is what's genuinely causing the majority of.
Well, they just look at a graph of price per kilowatt across Europe, and we're the tallest boys and girls in the class, not in a good way.
No. I know, it's incredible. But again, going back to, it's a stumbling block for people trying to get on the property ladder, because the price.
Well, that's another area. If you look at Simon Harris, he's Deputy Prime Minister. He is the leader of one of the 2 parties that is essentially holding this government together. So unless he proposes something daft, anything he says should happen, will happen.
Yeah.
So Micheál Martin, Fianna Fáil have more seats than Fine Gael. So Micheál Martin gets to be Taoiseach first. And Micheál may well retire when Micheál may not remain leader of Fianna Fáil for this entire government, this entire Dáil term. So it suits Micheál for that reason to go first as well. So Simon then gets to choose what ministry would he like. If Simon Harris had guts and testicles, he would have chosen housing. And secondly, he would have said, when it's his time to become Taoiseach, he won't bother. He's going to stay in housing. No, that would have been putting your neck on the line and committing to solving the thing in 5 years. Instead, what are they doing? They're going to give some civil servant the title Housing Tsar. Well, it didn't end up very well for the Tsars in revolutionary Russia. And I don't think it's going to end up well for our housing Tsar, however brilliant he or she might be.
Yeah. No, I agree. And just another kind of point, or I'd like to hear your opinion. When we talk about Ireland going into a recession and we use the high employment figures that we have at the moment, where people say to me a lot when I'd say it's, it feels like we're going into a recession, people would say, but we've never had as much employment in the country. My view on the employment figures that are being produced are that they're slightly fudged, because anyone who's working at all is included in those employment figures, but we have no idea as to the amount of people who are employed but also getting some kind of a benefit from the state. So those figures. So just to give an example again, I have a business, 17 years, and I have 10 members of staff. 8 members of those staff are all part-time workers. They're all doing between 5 and 15 hours a week. So they're obviously all getting some benefit. Would you call them they're not full-time employed, but they're on the employed figures. So there's still a draw off the state for those people, So,
well, increasingly, the government is not there to serve its citizens, you and me. It's there to serve its rulers, Micheál and Simon, and the people sitting around the cabinet table. And another good example of that was the housing projections that were released and discussed in the run-up to the last general election campaign. And they were just total fiction. But there was no entity in the state that had the courage or the integrity to put their hands up and say, sorry, this is simply not going to happen. So I think we've got a problem in our permanent government, that there is a compromise in the integrity levels there, where the focus is entirely on serving ministers, and democracy is treated as a sort of a substitute civic religion. Oh, well, if the Minister for Housing has been elected, well, then it's our job to reflect his wishes, regardless of whether those wishes are based on truth or integrity. And instead, we have this revolving door in the housing department, where you're sent there for 4 years, but no more than 4 years. We'll take you out of there before there's a real danger that you get permanently sucked into the problems of housing, that there'll be relief on the way, and there'll be a new minister, and they'll take over the problems. But they in turn will be relieved within 3 to 4 years.
Yeah.
So it's more, it's as much about managing public expectations and protecting the image of individual ministers. It's more about that than it is about delivering houses to the public.
Yeah.
So if I was Simon Harris, I would go for housing, and I would be looking for quasi-dictatorial powers to fix this inside 2 years, with a suspension of all existing planning laws, dictatorial powers for county managers, one level of appeal with hearings to last an hour if the planning manager in Wicklow goes mad, big financial incentives to get houses built. You'd also need a parallel power minister administrative effort on developing public infrastructure to service the dwellings that you want to build in terms of electricity supply, water supply, sewage, and all of that.
Proper infrastructure. Yeah, exactly. That we need that. But I mean, I suppose we can't. What we've seen the last couple of years as well, the huge influx of tens of thousands of people hasn't helped. So obviously that's a separate issue and it's a separate discussion completely. But it has definitely driven the demand for housing way off the Richter scale, I think, than any of
Sure.
us
And why are we housing asylum seekers in places that are already under major housing pressure? So I grew up in County Mayo and did a fair bit of walking when I was out there, and there's a fantastic walk, the Bangor Trail, that goes from Newport up to Bangor Erris, and you're going through land there where you're further away from a road than is possible anywhere else in Ireland. So let's put all these people in camps up there, and let's give them food, let's give them a Wi-Fi signal, and there'll be a doctor there once a day, and we'll examine your case. But you're not getting out. This isn't a holiday camp. This is a processing camp, and you stay here while we evaluate your case. That's one point we should be doing. We should be creating. We should not be making it comfortable to come here and apply for asylum on a false basis. Second thing we should do is people who are here legally, let's say like Ukrainian refugees. 4/5 of Ukraine is occupied by Ukraine. Living costs are cheaper in Ukraine than in Ireland. So let's give financial incentives to the Ukrainian refugees who are here to go back to Ukraine. We pay for you to live in Ukraine. It'll cost us less and it'll free up housing. The third thing we need to look at then is work permits. So we should set, in my opinion, we should set a very high minimum income that somebody must achieve to qualify for a work permit. So we have a very, how should I say, skewed tax and social welfare system. So you need to be earning significantly above the average wage to be making a net financial contribution to the state.
Yeah.
Because our tax system is so skewed to taxing higher earners rather than lower earners, and because welfare payments are considerably more generous than in the UK. So if we let in people on work permits who are earning, let's say, just the average industrial wage, they're going to be net withdrawers from the Irish social state if they stay for the rest of their lives. So why are we doing that? Let the employer pick up the tab. Let the employer pay Irish people more money, or find Irish people who've gone to Australia and bring them back.
Yeah.
So why the hell are we bringing in external workers where we're under no obligation to bring them in conditions where that is going to add to the financial burden on the Irish state in the long run?
And pressure, obviously, on all our resources and infrastructures. Yeah, definitely.
So if we're going to have pressure, let's have pressure from Irish people. That's fine. But why bring on pressure onto ourselves, which our system is too constipated to cope with? The other thing is, when are we going to fire some people in the public service?
I think we've
got non-action on housing. We've got non-action on control of public spending. Yet we've big departments of housing and public expenditure reform. To what end?
I think they're unsackable though, the public sector. They don't seem to be.
Well, sorry, you get a new. I would just change that, and also, and again, put it to a plebiscite. Hold a vote on the matter. Let the people decide.
Yeah. Put it back to the people.
So I think an interesting and subversive approach to the next general election from centre-right minded people would be to set up a plebiscite party where we identify 5 big public policy issues and we let the public decide. We essentially trade off the fact that there's significant mistrust of individual public representatives' capacity to deliver anything, and we turn it into a self-service democracy. We're not going to go into government. None of us will become ministers, but we're going to insist referendum on this, on this, on this, on this timetable. And there'll be more referendums if these work. And
That
I
sounds
think
like a
that
good
would
idea, Cormac. I'm with it.
undermine the flatulent parties that are there right now,
Yeah.
just creating wind. And
First referendum. Do we need all of these NGOs?
well, I'd leave that out. Just let's not would you rather a reduction in tax and social security charges or a continuation of NGO funding?
Yeah.
Uh,
Perfect.
straight choice.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's your call.
I like that idea. I have to say, I think it's a good idea. And it's thinking
And you
outside
see,
of the box.
if you have an electorate that is fed up with Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil, and by Jesus, they're fed up already,
Oh,
and they want change, but they don't want Mary Lou and her unmerry
they
men.
don't see Sinn Féin as change. I don't believe they see that as change. That's the problem. People are
Yes.
kind of going out of the
Yeah.
frying pan into the fire, basically.
Oh, it's, yeah, into the incinerator. So I think something that is fresh and that is real Republican.
Yeah. Back to the people.
Not firing shots over graves,
Yeah.
and wearing masks and balaclavas, but empowering the people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it'll be
brilliant.
very, very difficult to argue against.
Mm. It would actually, yeah, from any perspective. Even our mainstream media would find it hard to put too many labels or targets there. I think it's a great idea.
Mm.
I'm conscious of time, so I'm not going to keep you too much longer. I just have one or two more questions. So firstly, again, as a small business owner, I feel that the small businesses in Ireland have been deeply neglected by government. They make a lot of decisions for us, and yet they have no idea of the impact. And I'm saying things like the national minimum wage, which I agree that there should be a minimum wage, but when they up it by 20%, it's a huge slap in the face for a small employer, that's trying to keep their head above water. I just believe the government haven't been looking after small businesses. Is there an over-reliance on large multinationals and foreign multinationals? Have we become nearly so dependent on them for revenues, in comparison to, say, looking after the SMEs and trying to keep them afloat? What's your view on that?
Well, I don't agree with you in the principle of a minimum wage. I believe in the principle of a minimum income. And there may be a role for the state to subsidise low productivity jobs so that the SME employer can pay an economic wage that would
Okay.
be insufficient, but that will be topped up by a subsidy to bring the employee's income up to a minimum level.
Okay.
So,
So you don't believe the
have
burden should be on this. You don't believe the burden should be on the employer if they're small enough to foot the bill of the minimum wage.
I'm very concerned that that there's a frightening proportion of jobs out there that have no economic substance and that are essentially being kept alive by direct or indirect government subsidies. When you mentioned the NGOs, that's one channel through which that may be happening. So I think the state needs a new economic model that goes beyond foreign direct investment. Whether the Republicans get re-elected to the White House or not, if you read the detailed statements of Barack Obama's memoirs, for example, it's quite clear that a lot of Democrats have grave reservations about globalization as well as the Republicans. So I think this political push in America that American employers need to put a greater emphasis on looking after American workers. I think that is going to endure after Trump. And that is not great news for Ireland. I think that the Irish government needs to focus on a new economic development policy, which is essentially focused on domestic enterprise.
Yeah.
And we should be looking, in my view, at countries that have managed successful economic growth, such as Switzerland, whose backbone is indigenous enterprise, Singapore, where they have the highest incomes in the world, and Poland, which was a complete dump under communism. And the World Bank is now forecasting that income per head there will overtake income per head in Japan next year. And how did the Poles do it? They didn't have a job creation agency. Oh, we need a hairdressing authority to promote the hairdressing industry. Oh, there isn't enough arse scratching going on. We need an arse scratching authority. They just let the market work. And
Yeah.
like businesses can only prosper if they're delivering what customers want. And in essence, the Polish government, post-communism, did the opposite of what the Polish government in communism had done, and they just backed off the state. Whereas what we've done in Ireland is we have used the tsunami of tax revenues from foreign direct investment to permit government ministers to spend money on this, spend money on that, develop a revamped arse scratching authority because the first one wasn't getting enough ticks. And it's just ridiculous.
I know.
We've little bodies for everything. And what value are they adding? So I think we need a completely, we need to spend considerable energy focusing on what would an alternative economic development strategy look like. It has to focus on indigenous enterprise. It has to focus on reduced state costs, permitting reduced taxes. And then I think we just let businesses, let them at it.
Let them on.
And let the strong survive and grow, and the weak will fall by the wayside. And hopefully, like the Poles, 10, 20, 30 years on, we'll be much the better for it.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, my very last question for you is, do you think that Ireland, now it's hindsight's 50-50, as you know, but would we be in a stronger or weaker position at this point in time if we weren't in the EU, part of the EU?
I used to be a very fervent supporter of the EU. And I suppose I'm looking at Poland as a country that is showing how it can use the EU to grow strong, to develop very strong economic growth, while avoiding so much of the nonsense that our people routinely sign up for. So, for example, the Poles have declined to sign up to the EU Immigration Pact, whereas our government of GOMS just automatically ticked the box and said, "Oh, sure, we'll sign up for this." So I think if you look, say, at the first governments of the state, Eamon de Valera, W.T. Cosgrave, they were guys who put their lives on the line to win Irish freedom, and they took Irish sovereignty seriously. Micheál Martin and Simon Harris, they are chronic people pleasers. And back in the 20s, 30s, 40s, Ireland didn't have a problem at a structural political level uttering some policy position that it knew the rest of Europe would disagree with. We don't have that courage right now.
No.
We're just, we want to be, look, Pascal Donoghue would be the best representative of this. Wanting to be patted on the head and get international approval on a search for a European job so he can escape Merrion Street. I'm making a major disaster movie with Pascal at the minute called Escape from Merrion Street. But we don't have the desire to do things differently, and the
No.
desire to. And by the way, something we haven't touched on, but that is, in my view, coming down the tracks, and I think is going to be delivered within the next 20 years, is Irish reunification. And the Northern Ireland within the United Kingdom is currently spending 15 or 16 billion pounds sterling more than it's taking in taxes. So this is another reason why the Irish government needs to clamp down on unnecessary government spending. We need to become fiscally fit so that we are in a position to cope with reunification when it happens, rather than be sort of like gormless idiots
Yeah. Limping in
sucking
there.
air and looking for the Brits to underwrite Irish reunification. Like, De Valera and Cosgrave, Michael Collins, Richard Mulcahy, Frank Aiken, they'd have been taking a completely different approach to our, gowls, to use the technical term Simon Harris uses so often, in Merrion Street. So they're just chronic people pleasers, balancing up. There used to be a sort of an ITV entertainment show every Sunday evening. This was in the way back in the 1970s, and one of the things was they'd have fellas with spinning plates on bamboo shoots that were stuck in the ground, and the trick was to get as many spinning plates going in the air as possible. And that's what our politicians are doing. We've got this group, we've got that group, and they're trying to keep all of these different interest groups and external pressures and legal obligations. They're trying to keep all of the plates spinning in the air without standing back and saying, in the long run, Ireland needs to be thinking about these 2 or 3 things. And the 2 or 3 things we need to be looking at, in my view, are our business development model. We need to be looking at immigration, and we need to be looking at government spending in the light of reunification coming down the tracks. And none of these things are happening.
No.
And it's shocking that that's the case, but entirely predictable given the structure of our current political system.
Yeah. And like they have always been or tried to be the best boys in Europe. Like that's like you're watching it from as an Irish person, and it's just it's incredible. But like even recently, in the last couple of years, Micheál Martin said he didn't believe in the backward idea of sovereignty. And you're kind of going, how is it backwards to want to look after your own sovereign state? So if that's the Taoiseach saying something like that, then that tells you.
Well, I don't believe in the backward notion of politician pensions.
I don't believe in unaccountability.
Two can play at that game.
I don't believe in the backward notion of not being accountable.
Yeah, I don't believe in the backward notion of the state honouring its debts. I mean, it's just it's horse manure.
Yeah.
But it's Micheál wanting to look cool and trendy and with it.
Cool in the EU.
And he's a very old man. He's as old as I am. So it's not a good idea.
You don't look at Cormac.
It's the Botox. And that's why we have to fix the problem with the US pharmaceutical sector. We can't have Botox production threatened. That we just couldn't live with that.
I saw something recently. Somebody said, "What are the Americans going to do for all their Viagra? It's all manufactured in Ireland."
Westport. In Westport. I don't know what St. Patrick would have thought when he was up at the top of Croagh Patrick, if he'd known that at the foot of Croagh Patrick there was going to be the global centre of production of Viagra 2000. Is
that where it is made? Is it?
Yes. with a special blessing.
Special, yeah. So I've covered everything that I wanted to get covered. I'm not sure if there's anything else you want to. You seem to be happy enough there. Good. So Cormac, I'm absolutely delighted. It was a really, really, really informative and excellent chat. And just again, thanks for giving up your time.
Not all. Happy to do it.
And we'll get this out as spread it as far as wide as we can. So
great stuff.
Thank you.
Thanks, Elaine.
Thank you.